It does matter, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome to SafeStream. This is a three-part discussion on the practicalities of doing a risk assessment. This is our first session. We're going to be concentrating on doing a risk assessment, and it's been organized by the Rory Peck Trust, the Frontline Freelance Register, and the Frontline Club. I'm Elizabeth Content. I'm the head of programs at the Rory Peck Trust, and with me are James Brabazon, who is a freelance journalist and a filmmaker, and Steve Cook, who is the director of media support and operations at TYR Solutions. While we are live, you can participate through the safetystream hashtag. Please post your comments. We will be listening. I've got a first question for you, James. In practical terms, what is a risk assessment and how you get started?
Right. Well, a risk assessment, really, the best way to look at a risk assessment, it's your best way of helping yourself in advance of needing assistance. The point on location at which you need help is the point at which you are probably least likely to be able to help yourself. Mm-hmm. So what a risk assessment really is, it's you helping yourself in advance. So everything you do in a risk assessment is for you. It's for your own safety and for your own benefit. And really what you're doing is the process of a risk assessment is you're looking at the potential threats that exist on location. And you're looking at how those threats might affect you, your project, your contributors, and the people that you work with. You're looking at how they might affect you and what it is that you can do to try and reduce the effects of those threats. So you're looking at threats, what risks they pose to you, and how you might mitigate those risks, what you will do to try and make those risks less severe and less likely to happen. It's really important to stress there's no such thing as a risk-free environment. What you're trying to do as a journalist is to understand risk and, wherever possible, to minimise it.
Mm-hmm. We had earlier a question that came from Twitter. What are the basic steps for compiling a good risk assessment then, Steve?
I think, first of all, is having that broad brush appreciation of what you want to achieve, what the story's about, and achieving that in the safest possible manner. And like James has said, it doesn't affect you, it affects everybody there. So an in-depth understanding of the environment that you're going into, and it's not just it's the region, and it's the location specific. And that's everything from diseases all the way through to, if we talk about hostile environments, the bombs and bullets side of life. So it's understanding, like James has already said, all the risks involved all the way through. And you have to understand that region and what they are. And if it is disease, what inoculations do I have to take? But it's got to be relevant to the environment. You can't standardise a risk assessment and turn it into some cut and paste culture. You know, it's got to be specific to the group, to the crew, and to the region, and the location within the region. So you need to have an understanding of how things operate there. And so therefore you need to investigate it. Mm-hmm. And that's everything from looking online, colleagues, people in country already, okay, through to Foreign Office websites, and so on.
You're mentioning now your sources. James, could you talk a little bit more about your sources when you're doing a risk assessment?
Well, like Steve says, the key thing here is there's no such thing as a cookie-cutter risk assessment. Each risk assessment is different. Every risk assessment is unique because, obviously, as the good enterprising journalist that you are, you want to create a unique story. And a risk assessment is always story-specific. Mm-hmm. You know, those threats out there that might affect you on location, they're going to affect you doing a specific story. They're going to pose risks to you trying to compile or film or write a specific story. Mm-hmm. So what you really need to understand is what are the building blocks of your story? What exactly is it that you need to do on location to make sure that you can complete your assignment? And then what you need to do is get as much advice as possible about people who have operated in the same area working on something similar. And that's really important for two reasons. Firstly, the most recent up-to-date, and it's crucial that it's up-to-date, information about the region you're going to, someone who's worked on a similar story, and who preferably has a similar way of looking at security and risk assessment that you do. And if they don't, for you to understand what their risk parameters might be. So for example, you could speak to a local Syrian camera operator about whether he or she thinks it's safe to work in Aleppo. And they might say, it's fine, I do it every day. But just because it's safe for them to do it doesn't mean it's safe for someone else to do it. So you need to understand how other people are calculating risk when they give you advice.
Right.
But I'd say probably the most important thing is that advice needs to be current. The difference between someone who's been to, I don't know, let's say Idlib province 2 months ago and someone who came out last week, the difference in the quality of the information they can provide you is possibly life-saving.
So it relates a little bit.
I totally agree with that. And the other thing that I just want to pick up on there you said is that profile as an individual, because I totally agree that the risk to this person here, okay, and we compare the risk to a local operator there, totally right. And if we do a profile, what do I represent? And you've got to look at that as part of the risk assessment is how am I going to be perceived by going in there? Now, if we're talking storytelling, documentary kind of thing, people see Pelican cases when they come off out of airports. They go news. News is then represent, well, they're going to be sticking their nose in where we don't want them to stick their nose in. You become under suspicion and then all the other things, accusations that come across. So it's about looking from yourself from the outside in, what do I represent and how can I lower my profile? And that profile extends to vehicles we're travelling in and everything else.
How can you make sure that you're not missing anything on your risk assessment?
Well, it's partly experience, and if you, but even, you know, very experienced journalists who have been putting risk assessments together for a long time, everybody needs an external overview. You need someone who's competent and credible to look at what you've done and have a fresh pair of eyes on it. Because by the time you're into the deep minutiae of which field hospital it is you're going to get to if something goes wrong and what your extraction plan is, there may be a bigger picture issue that you've missed, or vice versa. So you really need someone. It doesn't need to necessarily be someone who's completely conversant with all the ins and outs of the location, but someone who's experienced, who can look over risk assessment and say, what about that? What about that? Because you see, there's always, I'm sure you feel this, there's a tendency for people to either become very optimistic about what they can achieve and write the risk assessment accordingly, or to become slightly wigged out by the apparent risks and become quite negative about what might be possible. And actually, sometimes you need an impartial voice to say, okay, let's consider this carefully. And that's where, you know, somewhere like TYR Solutions comes into its own, because you've got that impartial third-party perspective that can look over something for you.
I think that some people as well, in some cases, maybe if they're pitching their story, they may sort of leave some of the risk out in case that the organisation turns around and says, no, you're not going. And it's like, you see about some of the details. I've seen lots of risk assessments that I review, and the person writing has gone, well, our safe haven is my friend's house in such and such. That doesn't give me any information where it is, what the street is, what number it is. And then following on from that, it said that the hospital was 15 minutes walk from it.
Right.
Well, I still don't know which hospital or where the house is. So if anybody's going to act on this risk assessment, if it becomes it turns into a crisis management situation, somebody's got to pick up that risk assessment and understand exactly what the intention of this person was, where they are now, and what they'd be carrying out if something needed to be done. Somebody's got to pick it up and act on it. And so the details have got to be in there for a third party to follow.
We had someone tweeting earlier before, the situation can change on the ground. What do you do?
Situations will always change. A risk assessment's got to be flexible enough to be adaptable to a situation, and we all know that sometimes other stories fall out of the story that we're following or we're trying to get. If it's a case of that things change, and be it we change our vehicles because a vehicle's broke down, we're changing our route, or we're going to see somebody else, you've got to let somebody know your intentions.
Right.
Now, it doesn't matter whether it's you've got a point of contact inside the country, or it's outside of the country, or it's friends or family. However, it's you've organised that structure, you've got to let people know your intentions. Because if you don't, and we don't hear from you for 2-3 days, where are we going to start looking?
But how far you need to go into preparing, and how far can you be prepared for the unforeseeable?
Well, actually, you know, a lot of risk assessment is really about, it's a state of mind, and it's about methodology. The methodology that allows you to complete a risk assessment in advance is the same awareness and methodology that will allow you to conduct an ongoing dynamic risk assessment on location, which you can then communicate back to a third party. Essentially, when you're writing a risk assessment, when you're researching a risk assessment, you're really only asking one question, which is, what could possibly go wrong? And you're asking that of every scenario. If you are still asking and answering that question while you're on location and communicating those answers back to someone else, you are doing your job.
Sometimes freelancers are being asked to go on assignment on a very short notice. How relevant is the risk assessment then? Can you do it?
Yeah,
How you do it?
it's still relevant. It can be done dynamically, and that's whether for insurance purposes it can be done to camera, because we want to go down this hole at that time. For insurance reasons, it might be a case we do it on camera, but otherwise there's no reason why you can't have a point of contact with you constantly updating with, be it drivers' names, numbers, all the relevant information, and your intentions on a day-by-day basis. Where I'm going, the route I'm going to be taking, and any other details that are relevant for that day. And it can be done dynamically, day in, day out.
I'll give you a direct example of that. I was recently filming in Venezuela for Channel 4. We were embedded with the anti-kidnap squad in the Venezuela police force, and we knew that we'd be going on police raids while the police were looking for kidnappers who were holding hostages. And our understanding was that we would move in with them, we'd then be put into a safe area, an advanced squad would go ahead, they'd clear the houses, and then once the zone was safe, we'd move in with them. And our insurance was based on that premise.
Right.
When we got there, it was immediately obvious that that was absolute nonsense, and it was a sort of free-for-all with everyone going into the houses, and we were in the middle of it. So I made a lightning quick phone call back to my production manager and said, this is the situation, this is where we are, and that's then communicated to the insurance company. Our insurance profile is upped, we're covered, everyone knows what we're doing, no nasty surprises, on you go. You're making that phone call for your own benefit. And I think that really important to stress, freelancers can sometimes feel that this is an imposition that's being put on them by people wearing suits, sitting behind desks who don't work in the field. Okay? It's the best way you have of protecting yourself. The point at which you are being medevaced out of somewhere is the point at which you are really glad you've done this risk assessment. The point at which someone's just closed a cell door behind you and you've been removed from your cell phone, any means of contacting the outside world, you are really glad that you've done this risk assessment because you've done the best thing you can to help yourself.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that as a freelancer, we need risk assessments more than anyone else?
Yes, well, not more than anyone. Everyone should be, within media, everyone should be risk assessing. We do it in our everyday lives. And I say to people when we're teaching the courses, how many of you tell your partners, or your partner say to you, you're going on a long journey, text me when you get there. But I find it amazing that people in their professional lives fly halfway across the world, and be it editors or production companies, have no idea if their staff have landed safely, they've got to the hotel, or they're actually 3 days into the task and haven't heard from them.
Yeah,
But James, there is a case for freelancers to highlight how much they need a risk assessment.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, freelancers need to get with it. I mean...
I'm glad he said it, not me.
No, seriously, no, but it's like, you know, the days of like, oh, I'm just going to go and you're interfering with my ability to work as a journalist by asking me to do this is nonsense. You know, if you're a freelance journalist working in war, you have responsibilities. And you need to know what those responsibilities are and to discharge them properly. And if you're going into a conflict situation and you have no medical training, no hostile environment training, you don't have a risk assessment, you do not understand your responsibilities, and you're not discharging them, and it's not acceptable. Period.
We need to wrap up, and I'm going to ask you, James and Steve, to give me and everybody 3 top tips or advice for freelancers. 3. When it comes to risk assessment.
I think investigate is the first one. In-depth investigation of what you want to achieve. I'm not going to steal all 3 straight away.
No,
You're going to be like, oh no.
No, go for it, man. I need time to think.
I think the investigation of what we want to achieve and how best we're going to achieve it.
Right.
Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Right.
And that's either colleagues, local points of contacts, and third-party organisations like ourselves. You know, don't be afraid to ask for advice. All the social media networks are out there. Okay, we have Rory, Peck Trust, we have Frontline Freelance Register. Just ask for help, and people shouldn't be afraid to do that.
James.
Right. Well, specific to working in conflict, I'd say first off, understand why it is that you want to go. Ask yourself the esoteric philosophical question about why you want to work in conflict. Because motivation is the key determiner of how it is that you calculate risk. Do you need to go, or do you want to go?
Right.
And if you want to go, why do you want to go? Be honest with yourself about that question, because everything else you ask about risk will somehow be related to that answer. Second thing is, if you're going to work in conflict, get medical training. Do it. If all you can afford is a 1-day course somewhere, do that. If you can't afford anything, do the risk training course for free. If you have a broadcaster who will pay for whatever it takes, do it. Do something. And finally, final piece of advice for working in conflict. There's a great expression in South African Special Forces, which I'm sure is common to a lot of other armed units around the world, which is any fool can be uncomfortable. So there is no law that says you can't try and make your life as easy and as comfortable as possible while you're on location. So don't be afraid of taking the path of least resistance sometimes, and just, no one's handing out medals for hardship here. Whatever you can do to make your life easier, do it.
Brilliant. So with that, we close this session. Thank you so much for joining us. There are templates of risk assessments in our website, rorypecktrust.org/resources, and we're going to start our next session on creating a communications plan at 2:30. Thank you so much.